If you're building in the AI space, you've definitely heard these two names, LangChain and LangGraph. They sound alike, sure, but they solve very different kinds of problems. Today, we're going to break down how you go from just having a simple AI toolkit to becoming an AI architect with a master blueprint. Let's get into it.
All right, so before we even get to the solutions, let's really get a handle on the core challenge. Why is it so darn hard to take one of these super powerful large language models and build a real, working, reliable application with it?
And that's a great question, isn't it? You'd think you could just plug into an API and you're off to the races. But nope. The truth is, that leap from a cool little demo to a real-world, production-ready app, well, that's where all the nasty complexity is hiding.
And this is exactly where developers get completely bogged down. It's in what we call boilerplate chaos. You just end up writing the same repetitive code over and over again for basic stuff like handling API calls, getting your prompts just right, managing errors. It's a huge time suck, and it pulls you away from the actual creative part of building the AI's logic.
And this is exactly where our first solution, LangChain, enters the picture. To cut through all that chaos, developers needed a powerful toolkit specifically designed to handle all that tedious stuff for them.
The best way to think about LangChain is like a super high-quality Lego set, but for AI. It gives you all these fantastic, pre-built, reusable components that hide away all the boring stuff, so you can focus on what you actually want to build, not the messy infrastructure holding it all together.
And here are some of those key Lego bricks. LangChain gives you standard ways to manage prompts, to chain different calls together, to give your AI a memory of past conversations, and even to process your own documents for something called Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG, that basically lets the AI answer questions using your own specific data.
Now, LangChain gives you two main ways to build. On the left, we've got chains. Think of a chain like a fixed recipe. It's a straight line, a predictable sequence of steps. It's perfect for structured tasks. Then, on the right, you have agents. An agent is more like a creative chef. It actually uses the LLM's own brain to decide which tool or which step to use next. This makes it way better for handling more dynamic and unpredictable problems. But, okay, what happens when a simple recipe, or even one really smart chef, isn't enough for a truly complex job? What if you need to coordinate an entire kitchen full of chefs and recipes all at once?
Right? This is where we hit the next level of the challenge. Your AI doesn't just need to follow steps. It needs to make decisions about which steps to take. Maybe it needs to loop back and try something again, or maybe it needs to stop and get approval from a human. This requires a whole different way of thinking that goes beyond those simple linear chains.
And that brings us to LangGraph. You know, if LangChain gives you the Lego bricks, LangGraph gives you the master blueprint. It's a framework for architecting your entire AI system, letting you design these really complex workflows with loops and decisions, and most importantly, giving you explicit control over the flow of logic. It's a lot like a state machine.
And this table just lays out the difference perfectly. LangChain's flow? It's mostly linear, A to B to C. LangGraph, on the other hand, is graph-based, so you can have cycles and loops. But the biggest deal here is the state. In LangChain, it's often kind of implicit, or just not there. In LangGraph, the state is explicit and persistent. So simply put, LangChain is for composing tasks, and LangGraph is for orchestrating them.
So how does this whole master blueprint idea actually work in practice? How do you really build one of these intelligent graphs?
Well, it's actually surprisingly simple at its core. A LangGraph workflow is built from just three main concepts. You have nodes, which are just things that do work like calling an LLM or a tool. You have edges, which define the path from one node to the next, and then you have the state, which is basically a shared piece of data that every single node can see and update.
And here's where the real magic happens, with something called conditional edges. So, look at this. After the first step, where the agent analyzes the problem, the graph hits a fork in the road. The edge itself can make a choice and route the flow based on a condition, like, does the agent need more info? If the answer is yes, it goes to a search tool. If it's no, it moves on to generate the answer. This is how you build an AI that can actually reason and adapt its behavior on the fly.
You know, this whole idea of explicit state management is a total game changer for building reliable, production-level AI. Because the state is persistent, you can save a long-running task and come back to it later. You can create checkpoints to pause the whole thing and get a human to sign off. And for developers, it makes debugging and auditing so much easier, because you can look at the exact state of the world at every single step of the process.
Okay, so we've got our toolkit, LangChain.
and our architect's blueprint, LangGraph. With all that in mind, how do you actually pick the right tool for your project?
So here's a super practical guide. For a really simple one-off task, a direct API call might be all you need. For a structured, linear workflow like a RAG pipeline, LangChain is perfect. It'll speed up your development like crazy. But for those complex agents that have to make decisions, involve humans, and keep track of state, LangGraph is absolutely the tool for the job. The golden rule is start with the simplest tool that gets the job done.
And you really have to remember, this is not an either-or choice. These tools are made to work together. In a lot of advanced systems out there, people are using LangGraph for the high-level orchestration. That's the blueprint. While the individual nodes inside that graph are actually built using powerful components from LangChain.
You know, the real takeaway is that these frameworks are so much more than just tools for developers. They are unlocking a whole new generation of really sophisticated, stateful, and reliable AI applications. By giving us structure and control, they're turning all that chaotic potential into real architectural precision. The tools are here. The only question left is, what are we all going to build with them?